This is Surfing Through Cinema. I'm your host, Hawaii Harry. For this action week, I'll be talking about 007 himself, James Bond. Okay, so this week I'm going to be talking about James Bond, and obviously I didn't have time to watch every single one of them. There are 24 currently. So I'll be highlighting what I think are the best and the worst for each portrayal of James Bond, and that's considered canon. I won't be talking about the ones that aren't too much. So I'll get more into what that means. There have been many iterations of the character James Bond in both film and in television. His first appearance was in 1954 in a television film called Casino Royale, which was based on the Ian Fleming novel of the same name. There are many key changes, however. First, James Bond was referred to as Jimmy Bond. Second, he wasn't an MI6 agent, but rather a CIA agent. For years, this was the only screen version of him, until Eon Pictures made Dr. No in 1962 in the United Kingdom. This film would be what the public thought James Bond was like: tall, handsome, and humorous compared to the heavy and brooding character in the original novels. In the Eon Productions canon, there have been 6 James Bonds: Sean Connery, George Lazenby, Roger Moore, Timothy Dalton, Pierce Brosnan, and most recently, Daniel Craig, which totals 24 films, and one coming out this November. Originally it was going to be April, but now this November, No Time to Die. Okay, so there are 2 films that aren't in the canon that have been released, and there's another film called Casino Royale that came out in 1967, which had many actors that were popular at the time, including Peter Sellers and Woody Allen, just to name a few, and each of them were pretending to be James Bond. It's supposed to be a satirical comedy, but it bombed dramatically, and it currently holds a 26% on Rotten Tomatoes. The other James Bond film is called Never Say Never Again, which stars Sean Connery, oddly enough. But this time, it's a remake of a film he already created, or he was already in, called Thunderball. Although this one did well financially, most Bond fans and critics highly criticize its campy dialogue and lack of new ground covered with the character. The origins of the title for this one come from Sean Connery stating in the early 70s that he would never again play James Bond. And so that's why they titled it Never Say Never Again. And this one holds a 67% on Rotten Tomatoes, but that's from the critic side of it, whereas the audience side is 37%. So that just shows how audiences really feel about Sean Connery playing James Bond again. Both the non-canon films and the television film have since been purchased by MGM, who holds the rights to the character James Bond and to every Eon Productions film, but none of them have been added to any collector series. So over the years there have been tons of DVD, video, Blu-ray releases, but none of them have ever included these ones. So now let's get into each James Bond. Sean Connery. So he has 6 films officially: Dr. No, From Russia with Love, Goldfinger, Thunderball, You Only Live Twice, and Diamonds Are Forever, and then the non-canon film, Never Say Never Again. So I'll get into the best film and his worst film. The best one, in my opinion, has to be Goldfinger. I really like the dialogue in it. I think it's funny and witty. It really shows the best of Sean Connery as James Bond, for being both charismatic but also really funny and kind of an action hero. It's a really good example of how James Bond is and how people perceive him to be. All right, now let's get into his worst one, which oddly enough actually has a pretty decent opening title and has been sung over and over again and by many rap artists, in particular Kanye West. But this is called Diamonds Are Forever. Where do I even begin with this movie? The plot of it is non existent. It is so hard to follow, especially if you look away for 2 seconds. Because if you look away, it'll be cut and jump cut to a totally different scene. You have no idea what's going on. It was absolutely ridiculous. And then the parts that should have been long were really, really short. And then the parts that should have been really, really short were really, really long. Like his whole experience going through this hidden fortress in Las Vegas and then riding on this ridiculous robot looking machine. That lasted way, way too long. And then he jumps out of it, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, the James Bond music's playing, and he's riding on this little tricycle thing, and it looks really funny with Sean Connery riding on it. Oh my gosh, that movie. And just the fact that you could tell he's getting older in years, and so he just looks like a creepy old dude. Swooning all these women. It's really weird. And you can obviously... So, Sean Connery had a toupee for most of his films. This one, you can really tell, because his sideburns are kind of salt and pepper, whereas the top is black, and it's really not good. Alright, so that's Sean Connery. And interestingly, in between You Only Live Twice, Sean Connery said he never wanted to do it again. So you see, he did it a few times, not just the one time. And in between that, Eon Pictures or Productions was scrambling to find a new James Bond. So they got this Australian model named George Lazenby to do it. Never had any acting training, any acting experience ever to play James Bond. And he only did it one time in his film on Her Majesty's Secret Service. So that's why I won't be doing best or worst for this one, since there's only one. And I actually really liked this one. You know, it shows him as the playboy and action hero we all love him to be. But it also shows more of a human side to him when he's with Tracy. So, spoiler alert, he gets married at the end of it. And it's really, really tragic how the relationship ends up. But what I love is at the very beginning of it, they make you feel so invested and connected to these characters that the ending of it really is tragic. And you really feel that emotionally. So I think this is a really, really good one. I think it's kind of underrated, but I can understand why, considering how he only did one film. And there is a documentary about it. I personally haven't watched it, but it's on Hulu about his experience going from a model to then James Bond and then back to being a normal man again. So check it out. I personally haven't seen it, so I don't know how good it is, but it looks pretty good. All right. So let's get into the second topic, which is the 70s and 80s for James Bond. And the first one is Roger Moore. He had 7 films in total. So kind of tied with Sean Connery, if you count Never Say Never Again. And his first one, Live and Let Die. And then The Man with the Golden Gun, The Spy Who Loved Me, Moonraker, For Your Eyes Only, Octopussy, and A View to Kill. And the best one, I think, for Roger Moore has to be The Spy Who Loved Me. I really liked the song for it. The opening title song was really, really good. I really enjoyed that. And Roger Moore, he's known for being more comical than he is serious of an actor, which I kind of like. I appreciate that. And so The Spy Who Loved Me has pretty awesome action sequences. I like the Lotus car he's driving that becomes a submarine underwater and then shoots missiles. I think that's pretty cool. And I like the villain, how he's kind of complacent and doesn't really care that James Bond is there. I just thought that was hilarious. I even liked his love interest. It was interesting. She's a KGB agent, so, popular back then, the Cold War era. So that's the one I think is his best one. And now his worst one. This one was kind of hard to choose because, at least in my opinion, I feel that I love Roger Moore, and they're campy, but they're not the greatest of films. But the worst one, in my opinion, has to be Moonraker, just because they really, they really upped the ante for the cheese factor, and they were trying to capitalize on the popularity of Star Wars coming out a couple years before then. So I think everybody back then was trying to make their version of Star Wars. So Moonraker is really, really cheesy. The special effects for it aren't the greatest. It's just not a good movie. The villain's forgettable. His motives are kind of lame, and I just didn't like it very much. Now we'll get into the 1980s and the later 80s, I should say, with Timothy Dalton. He was the next one after Roger Moore, and he made 2 films, The Living Daylights and License to Kill. So Eon Productions at this era was trying to become more serious with James Bond, because people were kind of laughing at the Roger Moore ones, didn't take him as seriously anymore. So they kind of went the same route that DC did with Batman, with The Dark Knight Returns, kind of making James Bond more dark and brooding and serious. And as a result, the audiences didn't like it very much. So because of this, Timothy Dalton only ended up doing 2 James Bond films. So the first one, The Living Daylights, I consider it to be the better of the 2. I don't think it's a great film, but I think it's the best of the 2. It has some humor moments, it has some lighthearted moments, but, from reading what Timothy Dalton said, he was trying to be more like the books, because in the books, James Bond is more dark and brooding and serious, kind of like how Batman is. So it kind of makes sense. But the audiences were just so used to the Sean Connery and Roger Moore image of it that they weren't ready for something this dark and serious. So it didn't do so well, especially with James Bond fans. So Living Daylights. Now License to Kill, I think, is the worst of the 2. It's very, very violent, which I'm okay with most of the time for action films, but for a James Bond film, it's a little too excessive. And in this one, there's like no lighthearted moments, no humor in it at all, really. And it's really hard to like Timothy Dalton because he's too brooding and tragic hero-ish. So it's really hard to connect with him because he seems very standoffish. All right. So we're going to go on a break real quick. Here's a message from our sponsor. Okay, so we're back from our break, and we're going to talk about James Bond from the 1990s to the present day. So the next James Bond was Pierce Brosnan, and he had 4 films in total: GoldenEye, Tomorrow Never Dies, The World Is Not Enough, and Die Another Day. Now, interestingly enough about him, he was originally set to be James Bond after Roger Moore, but he had another commitment to the TV show Remington Steele, so he was unable to make it as James Bond. But after the kind of ho-hum with Timothy Dalton, he was considered again to be James Bond, and he was ready because he didn't have the show anymore. And he did pretty good with it. In my opinion, his best film has to be GoldenEye. I really like his approach to it. He's very charismatic, but he's also kind of big and cool and an action hero. And I think he definitely looks the part. And I think this is the best example of it. The villain's interesting. It actually turns out to be another 00 agent. So it's really, really interesting plot twist. And I think it's a fine film. Now, his worst one has to be Die Another Day, and this was his last time as James Bond, and it it was not good at all. It was very, very corny, and the special effects in it were horrible. I think the best example of it is when he's riding on a parasail over a frozen iceberg into the ocean. It's just, it looks terrible. It looks worse than video game quality. It was not a good film. And Halle Berry was not a very good Bond girl. I had a hard time with it. It really is not a good film. So anyways, I just do not like that film. It is it is so cheesy, so corny. It was ugh. It's understandable why it was his last one. I think the audiences kind of felt they were kind of sick of it, kind of done with it. So he didn't reprise his role after that, even though he said he wanted to again, but he accepted it when they said he wasn't. So that's Pierce Brosnan. Now the next one is Daniel Craig, and he has 5 films: Casino Royale, Quantum of Solace, Skyfall, Spectre, and then No Time to Die. Now what's interesting about him is when he was initially announced and shown as the next James Bond, there was actually a big outcry about it because he didn't have, he doesn't have dark hair, he's not tall, and he's not particularly handsome. So people thought he didn't fit the image of it at all. And so there were kind of low expectations for it. But it turns out it was actually a really good film and a really good choice. He is a good mixture of both humorous and action and kind of dark and brooding. Like, he's a good mixture of what James Bond should be. And as a result, he's made some pretty good ones. Casino Royale, I really like that one. But in my opinion, his best one has got to be Skyfall. I think that was the best example of who James Bond is as a character, how he could be broken and how he could be, how he could be more human. And some argue, well, Timothy Dalton did that earlier back in the late 80s, but I think Daniel Craig pulls it off better. And I'm really sad to see that No Time to Die is his last one, so we'll see what he does. Very interestingly about this, so to kind of follow what's now popular, they decided to reboot the whole series. So Casino Royale is James Bond first time becoming a 00 agent, and how he started out, how he got his license to kill, how he became James Bond. So I think it's a good film. They're all good films. But so the best one's Skyfall, but the worst one has to be Quantum of Solace. I mean, the title of it is kind of confusing. It doesn't really make any sense. Like, how do you explain what a quantum of solace, like, how do you explain what that means? I really don't like this one. And not because it's a really bad movie or anything. It's got good action. Like, the last battle sequence is really good. But it's really boring. And the villain, his motives are really lame and boring too. Like, it's arms deal. It's not very exciting. So I definitely think it's his worst one. But I still think overall he's done really well. Okay, now we'll talk about another thing that's really important and a huge part of the James Bond films, and that's the opening title sequence with the songs in it. And every single one has its own unique opening. So the best one, in my opinion, has to be Goldfinger. I really like it. It's very classic, and it shows scenes from further in the movie, so it kind of gives you a glimpse of what you're getting yourself into, but still leaves you trying to figure out what it is. Because it just shows you clips. It doesn't tell you what's going on. So it's like, whoa, wait. What's that? I like that one. And the worst one, I gotta say it's Die Another Day. It's I did not like that one. You know, Madonna's pop song. It's just not very good. Okay. So now let's get into my opinion of James Bond. The best Bond, in my opinion, has got to be Daniel Craig. Now that's going to cause some controversy, I know. But I think he's the best example. I think he's the closest we're ever going to get to a screen adaptation of Ian Fleming's books. You know, he's got the charisma part, but he's also got the action assassin part, but he's also got the humor part. Like, he's got all the things that James Bond should be, and I think he is the best one. Now, the worst Bond, well, the obvious answer would be the entire cast of Casino Royale, 1967. This is the non-canon film where tons of people are pretending to be James Bond. But based on canon, I think Timothy Dalton. I mean, yeah, he is a close representation of James Bond described in the books, kind of like how Daniel Craig is. But his approach is too serious and is not very likable. Like, it's okay to be a serious character, but like Daniel Craig, but I like Daniel Craig. Like, you like him, you connect with him. You don't really connect with Timothy Dalton. He's just too serious and standoffish. And he's just too dark and brooding all the time without any real emotion for things. Or he's too emotional. Like, it really depends. It's very hard to like him. Now, the best film overall, I'm kind of biased on this, but it's going to have to be Skyfall. Sorry, but I really, really like this one. He's superb. You know, Daniel Craig, he's superb as James Bond. And you see Bond get broken down emotionally and physically. And it's really very good one. I love it. You know, Adele's opening Skyfall is amazing as well. It's a really good film. Now, the worst Bond film, I'm going to have to give it to Moonraker. Roger Moore, I mean, like I stated earlier, he was known for his silliness, known for his campy approach, which is fine. This one just gets way, way too silly, way too crazy. I mean, the special effects, you know, outdated, cheap looking. And they had a really big budget compared to Star Wars. And yet it looks like trash, whereas Star Wars looks amazing. So this one really jumped the shark. No pun intended, because Jaws, the famous henchman's in it. But it was not a good one. And I really think it's the worst one overall. That wasn't easy to pick. I mean, like Diamonds Are Forever was also up there, and the non-canon films were, but I think it's Moonraker. All right, well, so that's kind of everything I wanted to discuss today about James Bond. Next time, I'm going to discuss about the next film for Star Wars Week, and this is a film that has Anakin as a master training an apprentice, jazz music, and not Baby Yoda, but Baby Jabba. I'm, of course, talking about Star Wars The Clone Wars 2008 film. Till next time, this has been Surfing Through Cinema with Hawaii Harry. Take care. Thank you for listening to Surfing Through Cinema. Make sure to check us out on Facebook at Surfing Through Cinema with Hawaii Harry and on Instagram with Surfing Through Cinema. We also have a website, www.anchor.fm/surfing through cinema, where you can learn more details on upcoming episodes
and on past episodes.